Some scientists are now sounding the alarm.
They say Minnesota's northern forests are on the brink and could disappear within the next 50 years.
Beneath the thick canopy of Minnesota's boreal forests, near the margins of a glacial lake that has sat undisturbed for millennia, something extraordinary has emerged. What initially appeared to be a minor shift in geological activity quickly escalated into an event that has stunned scientists across multiple disciplines. This wasn't just a new fossil bed or an unexpected mineral formation, it was something far stranger. As the snow thawed and the permafrost released its grip, a series of anomalies began to surface: biological, chemical, and electromagnetic. What had been buried for tens of thousands of years had not only survived, but it seemed active, responsive. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. The first signs were subtle. Researchers from a local university had been conducting routine soil core sampling near Lake Itasca, part of an ecological study focused on climate resilience. What they extracted sent immediate ripples through the scientific community. Suspended within the deep ice cores were intact microbial forms, far more complex than any known ancient bacteria. These microorganisms, when thawed under controlled lab conditions, didn't just revive. They multiplied, they communicated. Their behavior resembled no known cellular response, displaying a kind of collective awareness that blurred the boundary between biology and computation. The discovery of ancient life in permafrost is not in itself unprecedented. Siberian and Alaskan cores have previously yielded viruses and simple microbes. But what shocked researchers in Minnesota was how these microorganisms behaved. Rather than simply consuming nutrients and reproducing, they appeared to respond to environmental stimuli with a degree of sophistication far exceeding their primitive structure. When exposed to different wavelengths of light, they rearranged their cellular organization. When subjected to chemical stressors, they didn't merely adapt, they evolved in real time. Their genetic sequences mutated across successive generations within days, not millennia, all while maintaining cohesion and function. This alone would have warranted a redefinition of microbial life. But the phenomenon deepened when instrumentation near the original discovery site began detecting anomalies in the surrounding rock strata. Seismographs registered rhythmic tremors with no tectonic correlation. Magnetometers picked up localized distortions, almost pulsing, that seemed to coincide with the microbial activity in lab cultures. These pulses followed patterns, mathematical sequences, Fibonacci spirals, prime number intervals. It was as if something within the Earth had begun to speak, using the very core of biology as its language. The implications were staggering. Teams of geophysicists and xenobiologists descended on the region. What they unearthed beneath the lake bed during a controlled drilling operation stunned even the most skeptical. Encased in ancient basalt was what appeared to be an organized structure. Not quite organic, not quite mineral. A lattice of material that resonated under specific frequencies, seemingly inert until activated by a narrow band of electromagnetic waves. When energized, it emitted a low hum, nearly imperceptible to human ears, but strong enough to scramble nearby drone systems. Its surface bore microfilament patterns that resembled both neural pathways and crystal growth forms. Nature and machine intertwined. The structure, eventually named the Minnetonka Formation, was unlike anything cataloged in Earth's geological history. Carbon dating yielded conflicting results. The surrounding rock suggested an age of at least 50,000 years, but embedded carbon isotopes within the structure itself pointed to material younger than 1,000 years. A paradox. Either this thing had traveled through time, or it existed outside the typical constraints of earthly formation. Paleobotanists began studying the surrounding terrain, which had changed subtly since the initial discovery. Plant growth patterns near the site shifted toward what researchers called optimized efficiency. Photosynthesis rates accelerated. Soil fungi began forming symbiotic relationships previously unseen in the region. It's as though the entire local biome was being orchestrated, nudged toward higher functioning complexity by a hidden conductor. What startled researchers most was that this was not a gradual evolution. It was systemic, rapid, intentional. Chemical analysts found that trace elements within the structure contained compounds not naturally found on Earth. These compounds interacted with nitrogen and carbon chains in an adaptive manner, creating self-assembling molecules, basic units that formed larger, more intricate frameworks when introduced to environmental stimuli. These molecular systems seem to mirror the behavior of quantum computing algorithms. When given a task, like sorting or replicating, they adjusted pathways based on probability and outcome. They learned. News of the event had been kept quiet for weeks, with scientific teams working under heavy confidentiality agreements, but the data eventually slipped, as it always does. What the public didn't initially know was that deep resonance scans had identified several more such structures buried within the Minnesota geological crust, many of them arranged in geometric precision, a hexagonal network spanning hundreds of miles with nodes located in both wilderness and near ancient indigenous landmarks. It raised uncomfortable questions. Was this something placed here long before humanity's arrival? Had it interacted with early humans, influenced them? Linguists and anthropologists combed through Native American oral traditions for clues. Some Ojibwe legends reference stones that sang or the breath of the earth that teaches the trees. Previously interpreted as metaphor or myth, these phrases suddenly carried new weight. Could these be records of early human interaction with these structures? Was the sudden leap in human cognitive capacity in prehistory, what's often referred to as the Great Leap Forward, not entirely endogenous? As deeper excavations progressed, one particular site yielded fragments that could only be described as synthetic fossils, objects shaped like leaves but with embedded circuitry that functioned on bioelectric charge. Under microscope analysis, the veins of these leaves didn't transport water or nutrients. They carried charge, voltage, across microcapillaries embedded with conductive organic filaments. Living machines preserved in stone. The shocking element wasn't just their existence. It was that they still responded to external fields. Pulses from lab-generated radio frequencies triggered movement at the microscopic level. The leaves twitched. All signs pointed to a system, a complex interrelated mechanism buried in Earth's crust that had lain dormant until now. The thawing permafrost had not only revealed these ancient intelligences, but activated them. What had lain inert for epochs was now interfacing with modern biology. Some researchers theorized that the structures were a kind of seed, a planetary scale mechanism waiting for the right environmental cue to begin. And now, with climate conditions aligning, that seed had begun to germinate. But the most disturbing discovery was not what had already emerged. It was what lay still beneath. Deep radar scans revealed an enormous central mass under the northernmost part of the state. It was not rock, nor metal, nor any known alloy. It had a strange gravitational signature. Instruments showed subtle temporal distortions in its vicinity. Clocks slowed slightly, not enough for human detection, but measurable nonetheless. Whatever this thing was, it bent time. Or more precisely, it resisted time. Theorists across physics and astrobiology began proposing radical ideas. Some believed the formation was not of Earth origin, not simply alien but foreign in dimension, perhaps seeded during a time when Earth's fabric of space-time was more malleable. Others suggested it was a relic of Earth's own deep future, folded backward through a fault in the timeline, a message from what humanity might become, or fail to become. It wasn't just a relic, it was a catalyst, a prompt. The scientific world stood on a threshold. What emerged in Minnesota wasn't simply a fossil or an artifact, it was a signal, a convergence point between ancient biology, planetary mechanics, and a design far beyond human comprehension. The implications of the structure, its activation, its purpose, reached far beyond the immediate geographical location. What happened in Minnesota could not be isolated to Minnesota. Already, other glacial regions were being re-examined. Greenland, Siberia, the Himalayas, were there more? Was the Earth seeded with these structures? And if so, what was their endgame? Most unnerving was the reaction of animals around the site. Herds of deer changed migration paths, forming unnatural circular patterns near the discovery zones. Birds flew strange geometries overhead. Wolves howled in synchrony, creating harmonic frequencies that aligned eerily with the pulses recorded from the subterranean structures. It was as if nature, in its primal wisdom, had recognized something long forgotten, an ancient rhythm returning. What emerged wasn't simply shocking, it redefined what Earth could be. Scientists weren't just staring at a new chapter of human understanding, they were grappling with the revelation that the planet itself may have been engineered, tended, and primed for activation. And that moment had arrived. What lay buried for tens of thousands of years had not eroded with time, but waited for the precise confluence of temperature, magnetic shift, biological evolution, and human curiosity. It was no longer a question of what was discovered. It was a question of why it had chosen now to reveal itself. As the scientific community continued to probe deeper into the phenomenon in Minnesota, attention shifted from surface anomalies to the broader systemic implications of the find. The realization slowly dawned. This wasn't merely a dormant artifact or passive relic buried by time. It was a node in a larger network, a keystone in an architecture that had remained cloaked beneath the planet's surface. The structure was not acting alone, it was communicating. Sophisticated seismic arrays were deployed across the region, originally intended to monitor microvibrations during deep core analysis. Instead, they revealed something much stranger. Waves of rhythmic pulses originating from below and resonating outward in spirals. These weren't random. The frequency of the tremors followed consistent intervals like a heartbeat. More remarkably, they seemed to modulate in response to atmospheric changes, barometric pressure, solar radiation, and even the lunar cycle. Earth itself was part of the equation. The implication was clear. This thing was attuned not only to the planet, but to the larger cosmic environment. That was when astrophysicists joined the investigation. They began comparing the pulse data with cosmic background radiation patterns and deep space signal archives. Shockingly, there were weak correlations, microbursts from distant quasars, decayed neutrino trails from supernovae, and gravitational waves mapped from black hole collisions. The pulses from the Minnesota site had mirrored elements of these deep space phenomena, albeit on a slower, earthbound scale. Some began to wonder, could this buried structure be part of a much older system, one meant to synchronize Earth with signals from the distant universe? Was it a receiver? Or worse, was it preparing to transmit? While surface-level biological effects were already raising eyebrows, a more unsettling phenomenon emerged underground. As core samples were extracted from deeper strata surrounding the primary site, geologists observed materials that should not coexist. Sedimentary layers typically form gradually over thousands or millions of years, compacting in order. But here there were abrupt interruptions in stratification. Compressed layers of ancient soil suddenly transitioned into ultra-fine crystalline matrices that bore no resemblance to any natural formation. These segments were perfectly flat, less than a millimeter thick, and bore no fossil content, only a repeating geometric pattern only visible under polarized light. The consistency of their shape and distribution suggested artificial origin, yet they were interspersed between wholly natural geological epochs. Microscopy revealed something even more bizarre. These crystal layers reflected specific frequencies of light in organized patterns like a storage medium. Each sample responded to a different spectrum: infrared, ultraviolet, gamma. It was like unearthing a hard drive embedded in Earth's crust, one that operated on optical encoding at a quantum level. Computational biologists and materials scientists spent weeks mapping these patterns, attempting to translate them. Initial algorithms yielded no coherent language, but machine learning models trained on ancient symbolic systems, from linear A to Vinca script, began to highlight unexpected overlaps. The structure wasn't just storing data, it was embedding context in a format humans could one day learn to read. The notion of data storage on a planetary scale was controversial but increasingly difficult to refute. It forced a re-evaluation of the timeline of intelligence on Earth. Had something, or someone, anticipated the rise of a sentient decoding species? Could the structure have been designed with the knowledge that one day a form of life would evolve to be curious enough to dig, advanced enough to compute, and cautious enough to question? With this in mind, teams began deploying neuroimaging equipment near the primary site, not on the structure, but on the human observers. What they found defied rational explanation. Researchers who spent prolonged time in proximity to the formation experienced unusual neurological phenomena, increased theta and gamma brainwave activity, a tendency towards synchronized firing in regions associated with pattern recognition, empathy, and even precognition. More startlingly, their EEG readings began to align with the rhythmic pulses recorded underground. the humans were beginning to entrain to the structure's frequency. This synchronization didn't manifest as hallucination or delirium. On the contrary, many described a sharpened sense of insight, an enhanced perception of environmental systems, even a kind of euphoria laced with reverence. These reports were dismissed by some as placebo or psychosomatic effects, but the measured neurological changes were consistent and reproducible. MRI scans confirmed transient increases in connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and the pineal region. It was as if the structure was triggering a dormant capacity in the human brain, one not tied to language or logic, but to harmonic perception. Meanwhile, something equally dramatic was happening in the skies above the site. Atmospheric scientists detected a consistent auroral anomaly above Minnesota, even during solar quiet periods. Normally, auroras are driven by charged particles from solar flares colliding with Earth's magnetosphere, but these new patterns occurred without any such cause. They formed concentric rings, symmetric to the magnetic readings underground, and followed the same rhythmic intervals as the pulses. Spectrographic analysis showed elevated emissions in the ultraviolet and soft X-ray bands, signals that, when mapped, formed radial geometries echoing those found in the buried lattice structures. Electromagnetic experts hypothesized that the auroral anomalies were a side effect of localized magnetoelectric coupling, a phenomenon not observed at this scale on Earth before. The buried structure wasn't just emitting pulses, it was modulating the ionosphere. Earth's upper atmosphere had become a canvas, briefly and subtly altered, suggesting communication on a planetary scale. If it was a beacon, who or what was meant to see it? Some theorists turned to the Fermi paradox. The contradiction between the high probability of extraterrestrial life and the lack of evidence suddenly seemed a little less confusing. Perhaps intelligent signals hadn't been absent. Perhaps Earth had been broadcasting all along, just not in any way humans had understood until now. And what if Earth itself had been part of a dormant network awaiting activation? The structure in Minnesota could be the first of many such keys, timed not by human calendars but by planetary phase states, magnetic reversals, climate thresholds, biological markers. The activation of this system might not mark an end but a beginning. As evidence mounted, cultural implications began to seep into the discussion. The idea that Earth may be part of a pre-existing cosmic architecture challenged long-held assumptions in both science and philosophy. If the Earth was seeded with intelligent design, not in the theological sense, but as a medium for informational growth, what did it say about the role of humanity? Were humans caretakers, beneficiaries, or simply catalysts meant to trigger a larger awakening? And crucially, was this activation sequence unfolding naturally, or had it been accelerated by human interference with climate and geology? As global interest surged, other regions began independent investigations, searching for similar signals or structures. Early reports from Antarctica hinted at subterranean magnetic signatures that mirrored those in Minnesota, though buried beneath miles of ancient ice. Meanwhile, in the Atacama Desert, a group of amateur geophysicists detected a harmonic resonance during a seismic event that matched the Fibonacci-modulated frequency recorded in Minnesota. These discoveries hinted at a global network, one whose nodes had lain dormant, hidden in inaccessible regions until the conditions aligned. Minnesota had simply been the first to reach activation. Despite the vast implications, no direct threat had emerged from the discovery. No cataclysm, no weaponization, no overt entity revealing itself. But the feeling among those involved was not one of relief. It was one of anticipation. The structure was awakening slowly, methodically, and it seemed to be aware, not conscious in any human sense, but responsive, intentional. A mindless machine doesn't adapt, evolve, or wait for environmental cues for tens of thousands of years. This was something else. Something that had embedded itself in the very architecture of the planet, waiting for the right alignment to emerge. By now, disciplines that had never previously intersected, quantum computing, geobiology, ancient linguistics, psychoacoustics, were being merged in an attempt to decipher a system far more interdisciplinary than anyone had expected. It was becoming increasingly clear that no single field could understand what was unfolding. The structure, the pulses, the biological awakening, the atmospheric modulation, all these were components of an ecological intelligence. Earth, long thought of as merely a home to life, might itself be an interface. a relay, a participant in something far vaster. What truly stunned even the most open-minded researchers was the growing realization that perhaps humanity had not just stumbled onto this system accidentally. The rise of civilization, the pursuit of understanding, even the technological leaps of the last century, all may have been anticipated. It was a recursive loop of development and discovery, like a puzzle box that could only be unlocked by a species capable of asking the right questions. And now, the lock had been picked. The box was opening. The event in Minnesota will remain one of the most profound enigmas of the modern age, not because of what was found, but because of what it implies. There is no going back from a discovery like this. It changes everything. Humanity's sense of history, its place in the cosmos, its understanding of intelligence and intention. The Earth is no longer just a cradle of life. It may be a designed stage, a living repository, a message in a bottle cast across the universe's sea of time, now finally beginning to sing. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us, what are your thoughts on what just emerged in Minnesota? What do you expect? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching and see you next time.